Are you able to explain and articulate why female writers are ruining Rick and Morty? Because I can't quite put it into words, even though I know that's exactly what's happening. Female writers, femininity, feminism, and the entire breakdown of the greatness of Rick and Morty is being ruined by female writers. And it's happening. And when you watch Rick and Morty, even if you can't put your... even if you didn't even know female writers were in the picture, even if you don't know anything behind the scenes, you're just watching Rick and Morty, you can see a difference happening, and you can see a lack of quality in a certain set of episodes in season 3. You can see the changing of the tone of the entire series, even if you didn't know anything behind the scenes. And to know that it's all of a sudden females, half of the writing staff, you know the changes there. I mean, I can't quite put it into words to the people who were just trying to be extra social justice warriors that I've been talking to and arguing with about them ruining the show.
Well, because
they want to stand on a pedestal and tell me that I'm just a man,
cis, misogynistic,
woman hating. Yeah, they put me in that box, and I'm just trying to articulate to them why. No, you're wrong, and female writers are ruining Rick and Morty.
Well, I don't think it's so much female writers. Right? I think that it doesn't matter what the show is, what the franchise is. Hell, it could be a fucking video game. If halfway into production, you fire half of the staff that you're using to produce this, and you hire a specific demographic, regardless of what happens, if that show is great, you're going to say, hey, this was a great idea because I did this. Or if that show starts to suck, and the fans call it out as sucking, it's not their fault. They're calling out what they know that you did different from before, right? You had a winning formula, you change that formula up, people notice that, and they're calling you out for it. I think the idea that it's female writers wasn't anything that anyone was talking about. It doesn't matter if they were female, Hindu, Chinese, it wouldn't matter. It's that idea that Dan Harmon specifically chose to select all female writers, right? So by him picking that, he's already setting the paradigm for what's going to be blamed or what's going to change. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
It's common sense for people to look at the situation and say, okay, well, he did A, B happened, so that's why C is the way it is, right?
Yeah, because you could see that it's female writers, that influence there is all over. The fingerprints are all over it.
I get what you're saying, especially the stuff like with them trying to tear down Rick. The whole therapist episode. The girl that wrote the script for that therapist episode came out and said, the whole idea was that therapist scene was her idea. She wanted to see Rick get taken down a peg.
Therapist, I don't know because I didn't see the video of the female writer, but I have seen a video showing the writers, and one of them looked like a younger version of the therapist. It was an Asian girl with glasses.
All right, yeah, see? I think...
wanting to dominate Rick, the ultimate man, smartest man in the universe who doesn't need anybody and thinks all this politeness is just bullshit. It's just dumb people hedging their bets. It's not... It's
not fragile masculinity.
It's a brutality.
But they're trying to portray it as toxic or fragile masculinity. And I get what you're saying. I mean, for 2 seasons... part of what made Rick survive, part of what made him interesting, part of why we were fans of Rick was that no bullshit. The idea, planning is for stupid people. Planning for failure is even dumber than that, right? He was self-sufficient. He took care of himself. He looked out for himself. But by doing that, he was able to take care of everybody else. Now we're seeing this paradigm, or this idea, where Rick is trying to embrace a life that he never really wanted, and everything is crumbling around it.
Everyone that I've talked to, and I say female writers are ruining it, they go on that tangent about being an asshole. They're showing how Rick is just going to be lonely and by himself is because he's not a nice person. He's the antagonist of the episode, and that he is really the bad guy because he doesn't show caring, compassion for anybody. He doesn't need anybody. He doesn't want anybody. And I'm trying to explain to them that those are not characteristics of someone who's supposed to be a great person. You can be an asshole and just still not be a piece of shit. Rick, it's okay for him to be an asshole. It's okay. It's not like Rick is the antagonist, just the antagonist.
Well,
like I'm from Jersey. He's not the antagonist just because he's an asshole. It's okay. He can be that asshole and still be great. That's not something to take away from him or crucify him for. That's not a bad thing. And a lot of males naturally, without even consciously think about it, trying to form an idea or an opinion, feel the same way without thinking about it. They're not trying to separate that. Yeah. But if you add female writers into it, female writers think about that emotional side of it naturally. So
not so much female, but feminist writers. Feminist. Because there could have been other female writers in the series and that didn't have these ideals that these specific group is endorsing. They publicly go out and try to support and try to promote. All right? You get what I'm saying? No, if it wasn't hardcore rad feminist writers, no one would give a shit.
I think it would still have an influence on the show. It would still try and have that emotional angle to it that wasn't there before. It didn't matter before that Rick was the way he is. Part of that was his greatness. Yeah. That he just... People are dumb.
Didn't give a shit.
He didn't care at all. He was that dominant man. And you could even write Rick as a female without the female writers that way, without having that feminist influence. Rick could be female and just as masculine as Rick is. He could... If Rick was a female, he could still be dominant and still not give a shit about anybody and still do whatever the fuck he wanted to do whenever he wanted to do it. Because he's the smartest man in the universe and he realizes how frivolous all that nonsense is. And I think even if you took Rick and you did add female writers that weren't so hardcore and weren't trying to prove a point with Rick and Morty, which kind of gets under my skin. I don't need female writers to come make a point with something that's already fine. Yeah. I'm saying it's not their platform to change the world.
No one was attacking feminism. No one was attacking women. It was Rick and Morty was never doing anything to antagonize that discussion, right? They tried to stay away from politics as far as the first 2 seasons went. Yet now, it's become a head-on...
They're trying to reflect the world. They're trying to be a social justice warrior with Rick and Morty. And Rick and Morty was fine the way it was.
It was great the way it was.
Because before it was like there were underlying philosophies with it. And it kind of made an esoteric message underneath the actions of Rick. And now it's not. Now it's exoteric, and now it's face value,
Rick.
And
grotesque or gratuitous violence, debased placating of people of the lowest common denominator. They want to see Rick kill some shit, blow some shit up, make stuff, and then they want to see, and then they kind of lace in the therapist scene that has a deep overtone, but really, in essence, it's just breaking down the core of that character. What you're getting at, it's fodder. It went from being an original show that had genuine ideas to something that seems mass-produced, mainstream.
Now it seems like everything else. Now it seems like everything else, and that's not what we wanted. We wanted the way it was. It was its own niche. And now when you put all that in and you try and make all that, now it's just like it's becoming, those episodes especially, is just like everything else.
I can see those episodes.
And that's why it's not
on
special
MTV.
anymore. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Those episodes are MTV type things. They're not their own niche played at 12 a.m. for a specific crowd of people. And a lot of people are getting really mad online about if you mention anything female writerness, it's automatically put into a box of you hate women and you're anti-feminist, not even anti-feminist as a title, anti-feminist as an attitude or philosophy that women aren't equal.
Yeah. It's not.
And it should be nothing at all saying that women are not equal.
That shouldn't be the conversation. Yeah. I get what you're saying. Dan Harmon was responsible for making that the conversation.
And it's not that female writers, by saying that female writers are taking the show in a direction that wasn't initially there and are adding things to it and adding tones to it that corrupt what it initially was and what it ought to be still, it's not saying at all that women are not equal. That is not at all. And the example I was using, which is still a good example, is if you take The View, an all-female panel opinion talk show, and you splice in half men to that show, it will not resemble at all the show that it once was because it was It was for that demographic and for that view and for that tone and for those people by certain people. And when you do that, it's not saying that men are equal. If you can't put half men on The View, it's not saying men are not equal as women. It's saying that show is the way it is, and it's great for... The View is a great show, even if I disagree with everything they say. It's still a great show because it's all women doing that very neat and different thing, and Rick and Morty is the same. So I don't understand how... I do understand, but it's absurd to say that women... that you hate women or you think they're not equal because putting feminism in Rick and Morty makes it not a good show.
Yeah.
Good Rick and Morty show plus half female staff equals what's a word that means just like everything else? It's just a mediocre, generic show, and that's what it creates in the end. You just can't split it and expect it to be the same, and then call everyone who observes it. Just an observation, just a simple and honest observation that it's not the same and it's wrong.
Well, just think about it this way, all right? No one would have, if Dan Harmon would have never came out and said that I'm hiring specifically all new females to fill this role. If he would have just said, I'm just replacing half the writer staff. These episodes played and people didn't like them. People would still bitch about the new writing staff.
They would still say, what's wrong with this? This is not the same. It tastes different.
Exactly. And if Dan Harmon theoretically, instead of putting feminists on the writing staff, put all KKK Klans members on the writing staff. I mean, technically it's the same thing. They have a radical ideology. I mean, they're passionate about what they believe in. Would it be the fans' fault for pointing out that the show became racist if they added KKK members? You get what I mean? It
would be this fucked up fans not swallowing what's fed to them.
Yep.
You know what? A fan base ought to be critical of a great show. Same way fans of a sports team ought to be critical of their team if they're not making the right moves and doing the right things.
Fuck yeah.
It should not be a negative connotation to be observant of the entertainment you enjoy and then to be critical of that, even if you're still enjoying it. Because me and you have still watched all the episodes, loved many of them in the new season, loved instanced jokes and situations and narratives in the episodes that were not up to par for whatever reason. And
completely.
I think it's our job as a fan base, same as with a product. It would be our job to observe and honestly just give our opinion and critique on what we think and what we feel about it. And if you have a large portion of people observing that and it being that noticeable and then critiquing it, you can't just
dismiss it. You
can't just dismiss them and then crucify them. Because Dan's crucifying them.
He's putting all the blame on the rating drop for this season.
Have the ratings dropped? I thought he was getting mad because of like things on social media and people just saying.
Well, he's getting partially mad about that, but the ratings severely dropped after, I think it was episode 3 or 4. They had a huge drop, right? And he was saying in the articles that were going around that part of what he blames that on is the stuff that people are saying about the show. Yeah,
because I saw the same thing you saw about how he said he hates the fans because they're like this.
Yeah, and you can't blame the fans who have been there for you since the beginning, who've loved what you put out. You tried something new. That was a gamble you took knowing that was a gamble. You can't get mad at us when we're the ones that notice it and say, hey, this is fucked up. The only way to preserve the sacred is to desecrate that shit into evolution.
I was also just thinking that putting in a half-female writing staff further pushes the show into Dan creating the show and them creating the show for them.
Yep.
And when you create the show, which I feel like Justin may have it may be more ingrained into Justin as being the creator.
It was his idea.
Is that he's creating the show because he wants a good show for the people to see. And it seems like when you take it and you make it a social justice statement to put in half gender equality writing staff, you know what I'm saying?
Affirmative action, yeah.
Yeah, it makes it where you're making the show for yourself.
To placate your own sensibilities.
And when you do that, it's going to corrupt the show. And
you see it bleeding through with Jerry and Beth. That is Dan Harmon's divorce
So ridiculous.
Right.
It's like the days of our lives on some of that stuff. And you're talking about the ratings drop. After about the third episode, I stopped staying up to watch it. I gotta be up at 5 a.m. Monday morning. I don't watch it at 11:30. I watch it on demand on like Tuesday. Because I remember staying up and watching that one, the Apocalypse one.
Yeah, and being completely disappointed.
And then what was the next one? It wasn't very good either. Oh, Pickle Rick. And I watched Pickle Rick and it seemed shallow and generic and mediocre, even when it was overly grotesque. You could tell it was kind of like a consolation prize for the female supremacy of Wong. You know what I'm saying? It was a bit ridiculous.
It felt like that one was manufactured real quick with the gimmick just to get out and to push that specific narrative at the very end. That all this build-up of Rick is this great individual that regardless of what happens, he adapts and overcomes to the situation. That entire episode's premise was knocking him down a peg.
Yeah,
you watched him do this amazing thing, breaking out of John Wick-esque scenario.
Yeah, he did.
Right?
Like a badass.
Right? Just to go into a therapist office and be broken down to the point of, basically everything you're doing is futile. You know what I mean? Of something which he's already perceptive of, but yet in that specific scene, we had to see it as it somehow was a grand epiphany that he hadn't considered, although he's the smartest man in the universe. You know what I mean? Makes absolute no sense.
Didn't she say he was pushing everyone away and...
She basically said the reason why he can't do maintenance is because it's boring. He pushes his family away instead of dealing with his problems.
That's right.
So,
and I was just thinking, old Rick wouldn't say, yeah, you're right. Old Rick would not give a shit who he was pushing away.
Yep.
Because he was about him and doing what he does, which they're on 2-4-2.
They all benefited.
Exactly.
As a side effect.
Exactly.
Yeah, it wasn't until Rick got on this notion of the family is what comes first. And
that sounds communistic, really. It's almost like the economy. When one company is doing great and being successful, that shit trickles all over.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? At Walmart, hammers are going to be cheaper than at a mom and pop store, but everybody gets hammers cheaper. Rick being for himself was better for everybody else than Rick trying to be for the family.
Yeah.
When Rick tries to be for the family, it takes him down to where he is not as great as he once was or as his potential would take him to.
You know, there was a really interesting...
That is communistic. I didn't think about that.
There was a really, really good comment made at the very end of this latest episode, Morty's Mindbenders. It was right before the credits rolled, and Summer says, there's no wonder why you two are always fighting and falling behind a schedule.
Yep.
And the way it seems to an outside perspective, it seems like the show was created by Justin Roiland. It was his idea, his characters, his plot, right? Dan Harmon saw the potential behind it, decided to sponsor and produce it.
Which Dan Harmon's first show, Community, huge fan of, loved it. And they did the reason they spliced in half those female writers is because that's what he did on Community.
Exactly.
After 2 seasons, he spliced in half female writers.
That shows a pattern of behavior, and it also shows a particular motive. You see what I'm saying? And I think that's what we're witnessing right now. And instead of trying to address that, he's actually avoiding and deflecting.
Oh yeah.
Like the therapist said was wrong.
Yes, he was. And if anybody's ever watched Community, if anybody there's watched Community, that premise of putting in half female writers would be better for Community. Is because in Community it is a group of people who all go to community college for all their different reasons.
The focus was female characters and
yes,
their
there was
situations.
already at the table of all the main characters. It was a group of main characters all sat at the table, and there was half females there. It was already had that natural 50-50 influence. The show wasn't like Rick and Morty, where it was directed more towards middle-aged young males. It fit better for there, so you can't expect it to fit the same for Rick and Morty because it's not the same show. It's not the same narratives and conflicts and things of that nature in there. And they kind of did break down the super masculine character in Community. I wish I could remember his name, but he's the guy from The Soup. Yeah. Joel McHale.
Yeah.
He was just snazzy, always fucked all the girls, and he was just a badass, and always say smart shit, and he was just like the leader of the group.
Yeah.
And it kind of did. I didn't think about it from the same perspective, but it did break him down and make him softer, and how he needed the women, and he needed his friends. And now that I think about it, that's what's going to happen to Rick. It's going to break him down where he is not that awesome, cool, great guy, smartest person in the universe, where he's going to be, I can't be a person without all these people, and I can't be Rick and be happy without the approval of my family and my wife, and without depending.
Remember, they had a whole bit about dependence and all how.
I wonder how Dan's wife would take this in. I wonder what Dan's wife thinks about all this.
It seems like she's the big influence behind him pushing for this bullshit. I mean,
it seems like she would be contrary to his opinion of splitting half female writers, which is why he would do it. Because when I'm getting broke up and we're breaking up with somebody and I'm doing it, I just want to do the opposite of them and say, fuck you.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
We need to get her on the line and get her opinion on this for sure.
That would be really interesting, man.
I want to know what she thinks about Dan Harmon ruining the show.
Yeah. It'd be a nice perspective to get. But yeah, I think in general, like I said, it was Justin Roiland's idea. It was his creation. Dan produced it. We watched the first 2 seasons as Justin Roiland's idea, maybe as creative lead. We don't really know the specifics, but what does Dan actually do on the show? I mean,
he puts things together, which I'm sure he's good at.
Right.
I don't doubt any of that.
I'm not saying he's not, but on the show itself, why is it Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland when he only does one voice character? All right.
Who is it for? Birdman?
Yeah.
That's what it is. He does Birdman.
Bird person. I think he does. Yeah, bird person. I mean, he doesn't draw. He doesn't act. He doesn't. Yeah,
but I don't know the depths of a show production, but I just know there are things that he is probably good at that Justin couldn't do as well.
I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is it's the core.
Justin should be hiring whoever he needs to write to get his idea put out there.
Right, and what makes South Park so successful is the fact that they do it all themselves.
Yep, those 2 guys do it themselves. And everything from beginning to end is from their mind onto the screen, and they get all the creativeness that they want to get on there. And they do social justice topics. Yep. And they do things that me and you and everyone else who doesn't like the female writer feminist influence disagree with. They're not far right leaning. They're left leaning as well.
Yep,
but they keep it consistent in the way they do it, and they do it when something's dumb, they condescend it no matter what.
Yeah, regardless of what side it's on. Yeah.
They're not always pushing to make a point, to win the argument, to show how things are corrupt and wrong. They're not trying to be warriors.
Yeah.
Even if they have some of those ideas kind of trickle through their show, like they did the whole Trump thing, and they undermined the whole system.
Yeah.
Their idea is more to undermine it, which Rick and Morty did before, just to undermine.
Well, I think that was genius with this season, and people are talking a lot of shit about this season for South Park, and like Wisecrack did a fucking video talking about what went wrong with this season in South Park. Well, you praised the season.
Know what? They've had 17 seasons. I trust in those guys.
They praised the last season because it bashed Trump and it made a big joke out of the presidency and how he got elected because Mr. Garrison was Trump. But this is the season that they focused on PC. And PC and all the rhetoric coming from that is being fodder-fed as propaganda from people making money.
They said they were done talking about Trump. And they got a ton of heat from it because they said, we're done talking about Trump. Everyone's doing it. It's not a thing anymore. We are not going to talk about Trump anymore. And they got a ton of heat from that as if they were backing down or something.
Yep.
And they were just doing what they wanted to do.
Yep.
And I don't think Justin and Dan have that same type of bond, and their mind doesn't go on one direction the way Trey Parker and Matt Stone have their way, because they've known each other since growing up and everything.
Yeah.
They're more in tune with each other and what the show is going to be.
I mean, the way Dan found Justin was a submission to Channel 101. You know what I mean? That's what the whole idea behind 101 is, to discover talent and then produce it, or basically like a sponsor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You don't have, he was never part, as far as I can tell, and from other one.
Of the creation of the show.
Yeah. It wasn't ever Dan's show. Dan just gave him money to make it big. And the connections. It sucks to see that something like that. It's almost like P. Diddy being in every one of Biggie's videos. you know what I mean?
If you don't want to see the producer all up in the videos, all up in the songs, damn, we really got to be the Suge Knights of the situation.